This evening, we have the new editor of the Air Post Journal, and the Air Post Journal has been around since 1929, and it's really provided the basis for people to be able to collect airmail and enjoy it, and I tell you, I've had a number of long discussions with Dr. Wasserman about, where he wants to take the magazine and his thoughts about how that integrates into membership and things like that. He's got some very exciting plans, and I love the first issue. So let me just turn it over to you and talk about the Air Post Journal.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. Right. Well, thank you for the introduction, David. That was really remarkable. And I'm really happy to be the editor of the Air Post Journal, and I'm glad that people got their first issues, which was definitely a little bit of a pile of work to get out, but we're going to be on a roll working on the second one, and it's going to be equally as good, if not better, I hope. My talk is entitled Flying Between the Lines, Writing for Philately and Aerophilately. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me. Obviously, I'm the editor. I'm a literary critic for the New York Journal of Books. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can see my most recent book, which was published in 2022 by Finishing Line Press. I've got 2 degrees in writing, a graduate degree as well as an undergraduate degree, and got about 40 years worth of editorial experience. So it might actually serve some purpose. I'd like to talk about the 5 W's of writing, and if I do want to have some engagement with you all, but if there's something really pressing, feel free to raise your hand and I'll stop and answer that question. So I think everybody knows what the 5 W's of writing are: who, what, when, where, why. But there's a 6th W, which isn't a W, which is how. So I'm going to talk about these things today. The who of writing is your voice in writing. It's not, I'm John Smith, or I'm John Doe. I have a degree, I don't have a degree. I've written 1,000 articles, or I've never written one. It's really about how do you project what you want to say within your writing so that your readers are engaged and want to read it. Ultimately, most writers actually want to be read. It's more important than being paid in the profession, I would say. Many journals don't pay, whether it's in philately, aerophilately, which we definitely don't pay, but even in the philatelic world generally, contributions are generally not paid, but many contributions outside of this field are also not paid because people are looking to actually make a statement and influence their world. And so learning how to have your voice, how you want to project yourself into your writing is really key to having success with your writing. I mean, there are obviously lots of different types of writing. You could write you could write a philatelic novel. You could write about airmail in a novel. We're mostly dealing, however, with nonfiction and creative nonfiction, which is nonfiction which has a story that's built a little further. It's not fictional, though. So in philatelic writing, we're looking at a nonfiction form of writing, but we want to build a story that engages our readers, especially in this field in aerophilately, because we're not necessarily just dealing with the nuts and bolts of stamp production. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the demands are for philatelic writing and aerophilatelic writing. Timing in writing is everything. It's not just hitting the market, let's say, when a topic is popular, but it's actually how do you time your work so that your work reveals the story in such a way that your readers can't put the book down. I mean, everybody's had a book they've read that they couldn't put down, and probably a lot of books that they read that they wish that they hadn't bothered to start. So what we want to do with our writing, we're not writing books, obviously, but even in our magazine articles, is create writing that engages our readers in such a way that they really want to get to the end of it. Because as anyone knows who's done any research for these topics, it is a lot of work. And to verify your facts, to find the facts, to find original photos, to find original covers, to find the things that people don't generally write about that aren't easily found, it's quite a lot of work. Learning where to place your work is a very important aspect of this. I mean, what are the right journals for the writing that you want to do? Why write for philatelic journals at all? I hope that I'll answer that as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit about the how. I'm going to talk about the mechanics of writing as we move forward. So let's look at some examples of how you develop the who or your voice. I'm going to have to move these pictures over so I can read. So this is from a book called From Holmes to Sherlock. It's a nonfiction book about the original Conan Doyle stories and developing a modern Sherlock. His first line, "It all started on a train." That's where the idea came to Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss. They were going to modernize one of the world's most renowned literary characters, remove the filter of a misty London full of hansom cabs, and bring Sherlock Holmes up to date, placing him squarely in our high-tech contemporary world. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's creation would go from Victorian gentleman detective to modern eccentric genius, from Holmes to Sherlock. Now, I can tell you, writing a book about something like how do I come up with this concept where I'm going to now make a modern Holmes from something that's well established, this might not be something that would captivate a lot of readers. So this author used this voice and got you thinking in the first line that you want to read the second line. And this is how it works with writing. When you're writing your magazine articles, if you start off with something that doesn't engage people, they're not going to read the second line. They may, but they probably won't. He's using something that's very captivating. It all started on a train, which makes you wonder, what all? Why a train, etc. And so then you start getting into the story, because once a writer is able to capture your sense of curiosity, you're going to go further to find out where the story goes. So let's look at another example. This one is from also a nonfiction book, Hiroshima, Three Witnesses. Now, this is obviously not a happy story, especially if you were in Hiroshima and survived or didn't survive. This writer has used a technique called an epigraph, which is a quote from a famous person, another book. Other literature is often commonly used for epigraphs to open the story. And I'll tell you why once we get into this a little bit. So I'm going to read the epigraph, which is the part that I've circled. Part of the horror of thinking about a Holocaust lies in the fact that it leads us to supplant the human world with a statistical one. We seek a human truth and come up with a handful of figures. The only source that gives us a glimpse of the human truth is the testimony of the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. And that's from Jonathan Schell. So the first paragraph then, after the epigraph, opens at 8:15:17 on the morning of August 6, 1945, the United States exploded an atomic bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. According to an official Japanese reckoning of 1946 that did not include military personnel, the bomb left 118,661 dead, 30,524 severely injured, 48,606 slightly injured, 3,677 missing, and 118,613 uninjured. And it goes on. You can understand when you get into this data that he's presenting, this author, this is a bit of an overwhelming data set to be able to expose yourself to. How do you get a reader to engage in this story? And what he's done is use the epigraph for this purpose. So he's used the epigraph to get the reader to think in a different light about what he's looking at. So let's look at another example. This book, entitled Fill the Heavens with Commerce, Chicago Aviation, 1855 to 1926. I have to tell you that the title of this book alone is enough to keep people from reading the book, unless you're very interested in Chicago aviation or you collect something about Chicago aviation. It's not happening. The author has crafted an amazing opening that gets well beyond the title. I've looked at the book. The book has a lot of fantastic information about Chicago aviation, which I obviously have an interest in. Let's see what he says. Men had been flying in balloons for nearly a century when Washington Harrison Donaldson, a muscular, saturnine acrobat and trapeze artist, arrived in Chicago in the summer of 1875 in advance of P.T. Barnum's famous Roman hippodrome. So it's a book full of facts. He's going to eventually talk about all the flights and whatnot. Interesting if you're very interested in that time period, but he has built out this massive story by making this painting this beautiful picture of what's going on before these events happen. So what I'd like to do is get your opinion about which of these three do you think the voice of which of these three is the most effective? A, it all started on a train. B, the epigraph followed by at 8:15:17 in the morning of August 6th, etc. And C, men had been flying in balloons for nearly a century, etc. And what I'd like you to do is put it into the chat, and I'm going to give you roughly a minute, and we will then we'll look at and see what people's opinions are about this. So go ahead. Okay, does anyone else want to contribute anything? So by and large, I would say spinning through this, more people chose A and then B, and very few people chose C. But the truth is that there is no right answer or wrong answer for this question. These are all very strong openings. They're just different voices, and they'll appeal to readers. As they read them, they'll get them in a different frame of mind as they get into their story. So they're all very strong openings, and I appreciate your input in that. It's important for you to understand your audience, who you're writing to. For example, for us, for the Air Post Journal, obviously we're writing to a group of folks who are interested in collecting Aerophilately, balloon mail, zeppelins, and so forth, and how the magazine can answer the questions for you. So when you're writing to our audience, you're looking at a cover from a crash that occurred on June 7th. I know this is a crash cover because it's marked 2:10 p.m. on this CAM 9 flight. It was an Elmer Partridge's plane that went down and the pilot was killed. This went to Chicago via rail. If I'm telling this story to readers of an Aerophilatelic magazine, that's great. If I'm telling this story to readers of the United States Stamp Society, it may not be as good of a fit because they're looking at different details. I'm not saying that they wouldn't publish this, because they do publish articles about covers and perhaps even airmail, but for us, it's a great fit. So knowing your audience is really important to generate your topic and to develop a topic that's going to be directed towards people who will read it. Also, when you open the magazine, you're going to see, when you're looking at magazine you want to submit to, you're going to see, what they're writing about and therefore who the readers really are. So I want to talk about what the point is. And I don't mean what is the point to writing, like why write. What I mean is that what direction are you writing? When you write, you must immediately focus at the very start of your writing on where the end point is. You need to know what you're shooting for. If you don't know where you're aiming, your article will not develop in such a way that it's going to be truly engaging for readers, or maybe very open-ended. A magazine article is not a question. That's probably better for a group of people that you can bounce your ideas off of until you get some answers. But when you're doing research, obviously you have those questions. But when you're writing the article, you want to actually know what the point is. For example, if there was a crash that occurred on December 13th, 1935, you're going to write about that crash, but you're going to build a backstory for it. I'm going to talk a little bit now about pacing your work and how you present your work. So as you can see, you're getting a sense for what I've been reading recently, because this book is Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War. Not happy topics. But it's going to demonstrate an interesting pacing. Before the sun rose on August 9th, 1945, 18-year-old Watakoichi slipped on his black wool uniform and visored cap, closed the wooden sliding door behind him, and left his grandparents' house in the Maruyama district of Nagasaki, a half-mile inland from the bay. Through narrow, darkened streets, he walked his familiar route through the old city, 2 miles to the north and east, etc. So why has the author used this very relaxed storytelling mode? They're using very relaxed sort of language, slow language, because he's pitting this against this event. On August 9th, 1945, the United States dropped a nuclear bomb in Nagasaki. A lot of people died. A lot of people were injured. A lot of things were wiped off the map at that moment. That's a very instantaneous event. In order to make this an accessible event, he's painting a picture of a normal everyday life before this event ever happened. That's one way of pacing a story and also using the story to communicate a voice that's going to engage your readers. If you drop into the bomb, it's going to bomb. I mean, people aren't going to be able to read it. Let's look at another example. So in this book, Poland Between East and West, a very, very technically nonfiction book. But yet, the author has a voice in this story, and the author uses pacing. He starts the page with the title, A History of Hatred, which sets up the story. The first line says, nationalism seems to survive all human progress. So he is already, you see the page, you see hatred and you see nationalism, and you see that somehow it's the antithesis of human progress. That's what he's saying. At times, it has directed its creative forces toward lofty ideals of peace, towards stability and construction. More often, however, it has generated unbridled passions of hatred and destruction. Nowhere is this truth more evident than in the triangular relationship between Russia, Germany, and Poland. So in the pacing of this story, this is not a relaxed way to tell things. He uses very hard-sounding words. He uses shorter sentences. He's trying to show that this story is more uncomfortable. I'd like to talk a little bit about timelines. There are a couple of ways to tell a story. One is from A to Z. I woke up on January 1st, the snow had fallen, my windows were iced over, blah, blah, blah. And I get through the year, through various events that happened through the year. And then on December 13th, an explosion happened at the factory. This story was about the explosion, but I told this in a sequential timeline. So I built up the story of the person throughout the year until we get to the event. The other way to tell the story is using a non-sequential timeline. This is when you talk about the event and then build a backstory. So in this case, using the random December 13th date, on December 13th, the day started off very cold. When he got to work, things seemed as usual, but at 12 o'clock noon when the whistle blew, there was an explosion, something like that. I don't know. I'm making it up as I go. But then going back and telling the story behind what led to that is another way to make a compelling story. So I'd like to take a moment and just see whether anyone has any questions that they'd like to voice before I get into more talking head things. Okay. All right. Well, if you have anything, you could interrupt. Let's talk about queries. So when you have a story that you want to put out, the best way to find out whether you have a market for it is to send it for a magazine article, for example, is to send a short query, which is like an email, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs that explains to the editor what you're thinking about writing and are they interested. I get a couple of these a week. This is actually a very good way for writers to connect with editors and to place their work in an appropriate spot. The, that is the most effective if you actually know who to query. So you need to actually point your work in the right direction. When you are publishing your work, you're doing something to help build your foundation for future placement of your stories. Let's say you'd like want to be in the American Philatelist, but they're not interested in your work right now. But if you're publishing, continuously publishing in other journals, and you have a repertoire of work to present to them that they are aware of, at some point they're going to want to publish you. So it is very important to create work in order to be published. And then once you actually connect with the editor and you have a story and you've passed it on to him, there may be things that the editor would say, like, what about expanding this section? This feels like there's some unanswered questions, or he may even say, these are the questions that I have. Can you give me these answers? It's really important to work cooperatively to be able to have a good result and actually get your work out. Okay, so why would you write? Well, fame potentially, but in the philatelic circle, that's a relatively small circle, but you will become known. Um, Fortune is very unlikely. I like this idea, fear. Anything that you can't think you can't do, you should definitely give a shot at. And I think anyone can write. The more you write, the better you get. Obviously, there's some education associated with that, paying attention, doing a lot of reading, seeing what other people are writing and how they write it, and so forth. But any reason that you can think of that's important to you for writing is important. So I'd like to talk about the mechanics of writing. So in the center, you're seeing our style sheet, and on the right side, you're seeing our writing guidelines, and then I have a deadline sheet that I hand out as well. It's very important to actually to take some of these steps to make sure that you're fulfilling basic requirements to submit your writing in any format for any type of writing in any, whether it's philatelic writing, whether you're submitting to a major magazine, whether you're submitting a book concept to somebody, formatting, editors take formatting very seriously. I do have all these things on paper that I can email to you, and I'm happy to do that. I'm going to sort of spin through them quickly because I know we got a little bit of a delayed start. So I won't go into great detail about these, but I would like to talk about them a little bit and a couple of the high points I'd like to hit. One thing that is a standard in the publication industry is that your work goes out to editors in Times New Roman 12-point font. This happens across writing. If I'm sending a work of fiction, if I'm sending a work of nonfiction, if I'm sending a book of poetry, if I'm doing literary criticism, whatever I'm submitting, the editors are all insisting on one font. That's the font that's used. So you may like another font. You may like to make your work look creative, but that's not what people are looking at. They're looking at actually reading your article, and they want to read it in the easiest way. And it's easiest to use one font and not have multiple fonts and confusion and formatting to clear out and so forth. For us and for most journal submissions, you'd want a double space because it's much harder to read single space work. We personally, I don't like to have people italicize or use bold because I have to find all of these if they're using it in the wrong way. It's easier for me to start from a blank slate. So I have examples of a lot of things, and I'm going to gloss over these, but when you write, please don't use abbreviations. That's not acceptable in submissions generally. When you first mention someone's name, you want to give their name and their title. Dr. John Smith, the base surgeon. After that, you can call him Smith. You can call him Dr. Smith, or if you want to go all with first name, you could call him John every time. What you don't want to do is get three different versions of how you use his name, because it might, to a reader in the middle of your story, seem like you're talking about more than one person. There are specific ways to write numbers, and I don't really want to go into that now, but we use the Chicago Manual of Style, the 17th edition. That's only one of many style books that are out there. Each one has their own requirement. Each editor, therefore, has their own requirement about how they would like style, how they'd like you to style your writing. This is what we use. Like I said, I have this all on paper. If anyone wants it later, I have my email that I'll give to you. Let's talk though about images. This is very important. So images are copyrighted. And if you are swiping images off the internet without knowing where they came from, without asking permission and so forth, you could be breaking copyright law unless they're in the public domain. Because they're up on, let's say, Wikipedia, doesn't mean that they're in the public domain. You can post anything on Wikipedia and anybody can post anything. Doesn't necessarily have to be true, doesn't necessarily have to be copyrighted, or the copyright doesn't have to be recognized. So the important part as a writer is that I personally look at where the image came from and is it in the public domain or is it from a site that will allow me to use it by giving them a credit, saying, courtesy of so and so, or is it even from an auction catalog you certainly would want to ask, unless it's an auction house that's no longer in business, then I think probably no one cares at that point. For example, this book, I think it was Timmy Rides the China Clipper. This book's copyright expired. It's in the public domain. You could therefore use any part of this. You could use the image and create your own poster or do whatever you wanted to. It's not protected by copyright anymore. But I didn't have to find that out. And it is important to know that when you're submitting articles to an editor because we don't want to break copyright law because, among other things, if someone insists on enforcing their copyright, they can force us to retrieve the magazines that we sent to all of our members, which alone is enough of a problem to discourage me from ever wanting to use uncopyrighted images. Talking about images, you want to caption them in such a way that someone else can figure out what you're talking about. That means if you write about the image in the story, like, this is the USS Bear in Antarctica in 1941, for example, this happens to be a painting, and the artist actually allows use of this. It was from one of the Navy sites, and they just wanted a credit to their website so that people could probably buy a print of it, perhaps. But at any rate, if you're mentioning this, which I hope you are in your article, like Figure 11 shows the USS Bear anchored to the ice, then the image would be also called Figure 11 USS Bear or something like that, so that the third person who's looking at this, the person who's not reading your story, who's laying out the journal, can figure out where this goes. Especially if you have 30 things, it's really important. So when you're writing in your story, you want to write and give a reference to the figure. And also, ideally, you'd write Figure 1 shows something like the wing being tested with a machine gun, which, believe it or not, did happen in 1930 something. And you'd read that in David Ball's story in the current Air Post Journal. Scans should be high quality, which you're not going to get from Wikipedia. Very rarely does Wikipedia actually have 300 dot per inch scans, but again, we don't know where they came from. So that's very important. Okay, you have a collection, you're showing images from your collection. You don't have to attribute that. You could say it's from your collection if you like, but you don't have to. If your friend says, you're welcome to use these photos, then you'd credit it courtesy of John Doe. If you have a photo that belongs to the public domain, you don't have to credit it, but it would be nice to say that this came from such and such a site because it's a courtesy. However, if you have photos that belong to another organization, some organizations require payment of fees. Getty, for example, every image they sell costs a minimum of $150 for a single use to $450 on the average. So if you take an image from Getty, like there was an image very similar to this, that was a $450 image. We don't have the budget we have, almost 100 images in our magazine. We don't have the type of budget, so we're not purchasing images like that. And then I talk about how to credit these things. I would like to take a moment to talk about what plagiarism is, because I think this is very important in writing. If you're using someone else's idea, intact copy written by someone else, as I've highlighted here, and inserting it either in whole or in part into your article without quotation marks and without attributing it to the original author, you are stealing their work. That's called plagiarism. So instead of doing that, you could do what I've given the example in the example here. According to Dr. Smith in his book Pioneer Mails, quote, "The mail was carried in 2 heavy bags stacked in the cockpit. to deliver the mail. The pilot banked the plane and dropped the mail bags over the side. End quote. Now, I made this phrase up. I don't know who Dr. Smith is, and I don't, there's undoubtedly a book called Pioneer Mails, but at any rate, if I'm taking a direct quote, I must quote it and I must attribute it. On the other hand, I can restate a quote and say, Dr. Smith talked in his book about how they delivered the mail. They dropped it over to the side of the plane. That is not a quote. That is not plagiarism. So it's very important. But if I took this quote and put it in my article because I like it and never said where it came from, that's plagiarism. And that is definitely very bad practice. Just showing an image of the Chicago Manual of Style, which I'm using in our journal. There are online bibliography builders. This one, mybib.com, is free. I don't think it's the world's best, but it does make references, and it could be helpful in making a reference list for the end of your article. I have examples of this that I can hand out again. If anyone's interested, send me an email and I'll drop you these in the mail. So I'd like to say it is important that you write. It's important if you have a story to tell that you want to tell. Do the work and edit your work before submitting it. Run spell check, create multiple drafts, make sure it's the best that you can turn in, and then turn it over, and the editor is going to edit it. If the editor looks at it and says, well, I think that there's a question I have here. I often write to someone who's made a submission and said, well, how do you know that this was dropped on this day? And then they'll normally write back and say, well, in this literature, it says this. That should have been in their article, and it's going to be in their article because the reader is also going to want to know that. In magazines, we work in a timeline, so being on time is extremely important, and it is something to remember when you're submitting. I'm very grateful to have you listen to my presentation. I would love to see your work if you're interested in writing and submitting an article to the Airpost Journal, or if you would like the style sheet or our writing hints or whatever. My email is there at the apjeditor@gmail.com. And I would also like to make a plug for the AAMS. If you're not a member, this year we're promoting our membership by offering $5 off in 2025. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not make a plug for myself because I'm running for director at large of the American Philatelic Society. The election starts in May. It's going to be, the ballot is in the May American Philatelist. It's a contested election. Therefore, someone's not going to get elected. I hope that's not me. I would really value your vote, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Dr. Wasserman, thank you. I want people to know. I mean, I've written for magazines, little things for a number of years. No one has ever either challenged me on anything. They've never taught me how to do anything. They've never until until I started submitting things to you, and so he read something that I wrote in the Society of Israel Philatelists, and he said, I like it, it's good, but it's too short, or maybe you want to go in this direction, and I just I'm excited not just that he makes the writing better, but that it's challenging me to be able to grow. And before that, I would just pick up a cover and I'd say, oh, this is interesting. And I'd write, a half a page about it and put it in, and people would say, okay, that's fine. But it's not really a fulsome story, is it? And when you go to a stamp show and you look at the exhibits, it starts out with a title page and an illustration or something, and it's something that kind of grabs you and makes you want to learn this story. And then you get to the epilogue, and it's giving you some sort of a reason that it stops there. And then there's this golden thread that goes in between it, and you're teaching us how to do that in the magazine, and I think it's great.
I see that I missed a question. So my wife brought this to my attention by saying, doesn't the fair use doctrine allow the use of an image in an article not written for sale or profit? No. The fair use doctrine does allow some leeway about things, but it doesn't allow you to actually take images and use them in a publication. Now, I could exhibit. Now, if I was talking about exhibiting, all of these copyright things are they really don't matter because we're not going on the road with it. If you take your exhibit and put it into a book, however, you're going to have to get a lot of permissions at that point. But no, you actually can't use an image in another publication unless it's public domain or unless you have permission. That when I say you can't, of course, people do this all the time, but they're breaking the law and they're taking a risk that someone may choose to enforce the law. And I have heard several stories about people enforcing this. So I would not want to set that up for any magazine. And I don't know any editors that would want to put themselves in any type of peril with their magazines. So we encourage people to make sure. And I have had to cut out pictures that I really liked in submissions, including my own, because I couldn't get permission. I wrote again and again. They weren't giving it to me. I found something else. So,
Okay, it looks like there's a couple more things in the chat. Like, is it allowable to purchase a postcard, let's say from the 1920s of an aircraft, and then scan it and then just use it in your article?
well, so you can go on to the United States has a copyright site, and they technically just like that book that I showed you about the Clipper. It was a children's book. She did a beautiful job with the book. It was written in the 30s when the Clippers were flying. Um, she never renewed her copyright. And back then, copyright was not 95 years like it is today. So her copyright expired, who knows, for whatever reason, and no one picked that up at that time. So it's uncopyrighted. So if you have an uncopyrighted postcard, which you would be wise to make sure, with a postcard, I'm very concerned if it's old enough. So look, if it's 95 years old, that the likelihood of anyone renewing that copyright isn't very good, especially if it's some odd picture that no one would want to reprint nowadays. So there are definitely old pieces that you can use. But if you're not dealing with that, we're often dealing in the middle sort of ground that's still covered by copyright. Then you need to find out, is it copyright protected still or not? And it's surprising as President Ball, David found out in his own article that Getty purchased the rights to these images from this Antarctic exploration, from Admiral Byrd's exploration, which they shouldn't have had. They shouldn't have had it, but they do. And they have some of the best pictures and they're selling them for up to $450 per magazine use. So it's challenging. This is how it works.
And the other thing is, when you were talking about if the presentation is something where it's not going to be sold, like it's being put up in an exhibit, it's not necessarily a problem. But I noticed on the magazine we've got a price on it, and I think part of your expectation going forward is that this magazine may be in places that aren't going to members of the society, right? That people might be buying this magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We had to start pricing it. I mean, simply because we have to sort of set the foundation, but um, I plan to get, we talked about going to a flip book. So our e-magazine will go away from being a PDF um, in the fairly near future once the website is able to handle that. And we'll go to a flip book, which means that when the e-magazine is released for those members that don't have a print subscription, that they'll just go onto the website. They can download it from there as a PDF, or they can read it like a regular book. They can flip from page to page. They can go to the contents and click on the article that they want, and it'll open there. They can go to the advertiser site and click, and it'll open the advertiser site, and so forth. So that'll be one aspect of that. But also, yes, once I get an ISSN for the magazine, we can start placing it. I'm looking at museum shops initially because, to be honest, this organization has published more groundbreaking research on aerophilately than anybody else in the world since 1923. So it would be remiss for us not to go out there and put our information out where people can reach it who aren't members. And that also can potentially help the society because we somewhat monetize the magazine beyond membership, but we have to, this is not a freestanding program, so this is something that the board will have to get in with. This is an idea that I have,
Yeah.
that we would do that, but I would never do it without making sure the board is 100% on board with that type of thing. But I think we're missing an opportunity. There are lots of small aviation museums and medium-sized aviation museums, and they would sell our magazines, and our readership would literally mushroom cloud like the nuclear explosions I'm talking about, because we're talking about a readership of under 1,000 folks right now. I mean, we're with our e-readership and our current run and free distributions and so forth, we're a little over 1,000 by the time we get all that put out there. But if we went to the Boeing Museum, for example, in Seattle, and the Wings Over the Rockies in Denver, we're gonna have like 10,000, 15,000 people that'll be reading our magazine. It's going to completely restructure how we interact with the world, and I think that'd be a very good thing, because
Yeah, I mean, it's going to bring in all kinds of new voices that are going to contact us. It's going to bring people that are going to want to become members of AMS. I
yeah,
know I wrote a book called American Astrophilately, and many of you know astrophilately is a very, very narrow field. There aren't too many people that collect it. So in order to sell the book, I approached NASA and we put it in the NASA gift shops. And that's how we sold the book. And it's not so much that people who were there collected stamps or envelopes or were astrophilatelists. It's that they were space people,
mm,
that it was the space story. And if you go and you put the Air Post Journal in an air museum, people are going to read it because it's an aviation story. And we're going to
exactly.
be interacting with all kinds of interesting new people who are outside of our sphere. And I think that's so exciting.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Bruce, I just wanted to mention to the group, I just completed an article for you, and just so the group knows, you're very easy to work with. I mean, your guidelines are very well spelled out. It's not hard to comply with that. I went through that whole process with getting permission for images and photos. There was one photo that actually ended up paying a license fee for, but I negotiated with them to get a good deal on it, so that I could afford it, and it was reasonable to get that picture to you. So yeah, and there's also lots of images out there that don't require that kind of copyright permission. And I would encourage everyone too, if there's a local aviation museum, take a copy of the magazine to them. I'm going to do that with this museum that's just south of where I live here in Doylestown. Hopefully, I can get a few copies there and get them to maybe even advertise in the issue. So you're doing a good job. Thank you.
appreciate that. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, can I
Um,
can I get people to unmute and tell Dr. Wasserman what subject you'd want to write about? I mean, is there and this is not a commitment. It's not that if you raise your hand, you gotta write for the Air Post Journal. But each of us have a couple of subjects that we're really passionate about. Some little subset of what you collect and something that you'd like to do some research on and that people would really like to read about. So I'm curious if somebody would just kind of sing out and tell us what you would write about.
I'm working on an article for you, Bruce, on Wrong Way Corrigan, Douglas Corrigan. I am part of a group that has a lunch, Mexican lunch every week, and David has joined us on one occasion. And Harry Corrigan, his only surviving son, is part of our group.
oh
He
wow.
lives in the same city I do. And talk about pictures. He's got lots of pictures.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we're working on an article on Wrong Way. And one of the things that will be answered was he really flying the wrong way?
Ah, I think we know
That
the
sounds
answer
great.
to that.
Yeah, that's not a hard one. Although he never admitted it in his lifetime.
And he doesn't need to, you know?
He doesn't need to. No. And interestingly enough, the plane, the Curtis Robin that he flew in, still exists. And
Wow.
it's been in storage all these years. And it's currently, Harry gifted it to an air museum in California, and they're currently restoring it, not to flying condition, but they're restoring it cosmetically. And so it's going to end up on display. And another neat item, which I can give you an illustration of, is Lindbergh hand wrote a congratulatory letter to Corrigan after his flight. And Harry had that. So that's a neat item.
That's really
I'm
nice.
sure David would like to have that one.
Yeah. Now, my understanding was that Corrigan worked on Lindbergh's plane, or he knew.
Yeah. Corrigan worked for Ryan, and there I've got a good picture showing Corrigan. He was quite short, and his small stature made him very useful because he could climb inside the plane to work on the inside of the fuselage when many people couldn't get in, but he was small, so he could. So it was about that time that he learned to fly too. So yeah, he worked for Ryan. So he built the Spirit of St. Louis. There was one of the people.
Thanks, Jim. Who else has got a story that
David,
Dr. Wasserman would like to hear?
David, I put a couple of questions on if you want to.
Oh, yeah. Let me pull that up.
Can I say something to Jim's comments?
Please.
I've been listening and watching. I had to change computers in order for my audio to work. But I have this Corrigan guy. I have sold quite a few of the collectible items related to him and pictures of him on eBay. I think I still have some, Jim. And one of the last ones that it was an article or something, and it was he didn't go the wrong way by mistake.
Is that right? Just a minute. I gotta write that down.
So I will try. I want to say earlier, I married into this mess, and you've all heard this before.
We love you.
About 25 years ago, we built a house and a hobby room, and then, it all came. And so I have been a part of it for 25 years. I still have a half a room full. And we have donated a lot over the years, and I really don't like to do that because it doesn't get into the hands of people like you, members who, really appreciate this stuff. And I like to call it stuff because David calls it that. But what I'm going to propose that a possibility. I probably have 200 FAM covers, and I probably have 300 or 400 CAM covers. And I'm wondering if in another auction, I could just put like a CAM 57 and how many covers I have, and then let whoever wants them maybe bid. But then it's not that I want a lot of money for them. If they just would pay the shipping. But yeah, I really want to get this out of my house.
Well, we can
Carolyn,
help you.
I promise you won't get a lot for it.
Yeah.
Well, and I like the hobby enough. I think I almost have enjoyed it more than my husband and my father-in-law. But I got the new journal today, and it is amazing. It is.
I know.
Beautiful.
I know.
And but of all the articles, 3/4 of them I know nothing about.
Mhm.
So there is so much to learn, in this hobby. It's never ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to get Carolyn to do an article on baggage tags and baggage labels with Daniel, but
Yeah.
I don't think he's up to it right now.
Well, he's the authority, so he should be the one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think his health is such that he has to focus on that right now. But perhaps in the future, because the baggage labels and tags are just so beautiful, they would look so nice in a magazine.
Well, that's another part. I've got a lot of the rarely valuable ones, and they don't sell on eBay anymore because there's so many copies have been made and so many dealers sell them. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with some of these very valuable ones I have, but that's
Well,
another.
get with Jim. I would love to see some of that stuff come up next month. Who else has got an article for Dr. Wasserman in their head? Like I said, it's not. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but we're just kind of throwing out spitballing ideas. Anybody? Okay. Okay. Well, you can be thinking about it. I think he's probably got enough articles for his next magazine. But editors are always looking for new, fresh ideas, new research that they can have in their in basket, so that so they've got something exciting for the membership. All right. Anything else before we call it? We're up around the top of the hour.
I still have two questions there.
Oh, I didn't see them. Would you just go ahead?
Yeah, I don't see them, Ken.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first one is, if you show a newspaper article in your article, you have to get the paper's okay to use it.
You don't have to. So it depends. So the article, yes, but if you're talking about a headline, no. Headlines are not copyrightable.
Okay, but if you just show like an article, then you have to get their okay to use it, in addition to crediting.
Unless it's fallen out of copyright.
Yeah.
So a lot of newspapers have been bought by other groups, and it's really difficult to actually get them to respond.
Yeah, right.
But
Okay.
we have a couple of newspaper clippings that we did get permission to use.
Right.
But
Okay.
other ones, getting a response is really tough on old articles. But
Okay.
headlines are exempt from copyright. They're
Okay.
not able to be copyrighted.
Okay.
And what's the second
And
question?
Bruce,
Okay. My other question is, if you show someone's cover in your article other than your own, do you have to get that owner's okay to show it?
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Bruce, I just wanted to comment on your response to the first question. I think, as you mentioned, any newspaper that that was published before 1930, that's fair game. You can use that. But there is this outfit called PARS, which I don't remember what it stands for, but PARS. They sort of do all the copyright clearing for current newspaper articles. And I've used them, and they actually get back to you fairly quickly. Within a matter of 2 or 3 days, they'll tell you whether there's a copyright issue, and then they provide you the estimated fee, which oftentimes, as you point out, can be quite shocking. But it's a pretty quick way to get a heads up whether you've got a copyright issue there.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I usually go to the source. I see who they were. I see who bought them. Then I'm sending a letter off to them. Many of them don't care anymore. That's, what the things that I've used that I was certain about, but the things I wasn't certain about that I couldn't be certain. I had some really great, one particular clipping that I really liked that was in Samin's article that I had to drop because they very aggressively sell their rights, even from 1940 something. And at the end of the day, I just don't really have a budget for that for the journal. If contributors like Mike, who really want to tell the story and really want the piece in there, are willing to do that, and I would do it for my own piece if it was a critical image as well. But we just don't have a budget for that, so I can't.
Well, what was it? An image? A photo?
It was it was a photograph of because it was in her extensive article about glider mail,
Oh yeah.
about scheduled mail.
Okay,
So it was an image of a plane with the captions and so forth of them towing a glider right after the war. Yeah.
thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you all for coming tonight.